Throughout time, people across the world told each other tales of how they came to be, of heroes and monsters, romance and tragedy, death and rebirth. Mythology helped shape the ancient world, explaining the unexplainable. This is Mythology Unleashed. A long time ago, there lived a king and a queen who wanted, more than anything in the whole world, a child of their own. They tried time and time again, but to no avail. But then one day, as the queen swam in the lake, she was approached by a curious creature, a frog. The small amphibian looked to the queen and told her that her and her husband's deepest wish will be fulfilled in due time. Before a year has gone by, they will have a daughter. The frog's words turned out to be true, and before 12 months had elapsed, the king and queen had a lovely daughter, and their hearts were filled with joy. The king called a grand feast in honor of his newborn child, the new princess, and invited royalty, nobility, gentry, relatives near and far, dear friends, and most distinguished of all, the wise women of his kingdom, the good fairies, as they were called, in order that they may be kind and well disposed toward the child. There were 13 in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 gold plates for them to eat from, he opted not to invite one of them. The feast was a grand spectacle, and the wise women bestowed gifts upon the child, gifts of beauty, song, virtue, modesty, riches, and so forth, gifts that anyone would want to have for themselves. When 11 of the 12 had given their gifts, the 13th burst into the throne room, enraged at not being invited to the christening, and determined to get justice for such an insult. Without even acknowledging the king, the queen, the guests, or even the other wise women, she cast a wicked spell, and decreed that during her 15th year of life, the princess would prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die. Without another word, the slighted fairy turned and left, the king's court as silent as the grave. All in attendance were in shock, but there was a glimmer of hope to be had. The final wise woman approached and gave the princess her gift. She could not undo the magic of her sister, but she could soften it instead. The princess would not die, but rather fall into a deep sleep of 100 years. The king was determined to find a way to keep this curse from ever taking place, and he decreed that all spinning wheels and spindles in the kingdom be burned. But a bonfire could not stop magic or destiny. And so the years passed, and the gifts of the wise women to the princess were plenteously fulfilled, as she was kind, modest, beautiful, good-natured, and wise beyond her years, that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened on the very day when the princess was 15 years old. Her parents were away from the castle, and she decided to explore much of the old building, until she came to an old tower. Up the stairs, and in a secluded room with a bed, sat an old woman with a spindle, spinning her flax. Fascinated by the contraption, the princess examined the spindle as it spun, and as fate would have it, she pricked her finger on the spindle, and the spell took hold. The princess slumped onto the bed and fell into the deep sleep, a sleep that cast itself over the entire castle. Her parents had returned home at that moment, and they began to go to sleep, and the entirety of the court followed. The servants in their quarters, the dogs in the yard, the horses in the stable, the pigeons on the ramparts, the flies on the wall, and even the fire itself fell asleep. The curse continued on. Round and round the castle grew a dense hedge of thorns that grew taller and taller each year. It covered the whole of the structure, until there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag on the roof. Decades passed, and a legend spread about the countryside of the castle and the sleeping beauty within, who the people referred to as Briar Rose, and who could only be awakened from her deep slumber by true love's kiss. Many ambitious youths, sons of kings and nobles, ventured forth to win the heart of Briar Rose and awaken the sleeping beauty, but none could make it through the thorny hedges. Those with enough sense turned back upon seeing it, and those foolish enough to try and break through found themselves impaled upon the razor-sharp thorns. When nearly 100 years had passed, a young prince had heard the stories of the sleeping beauty, and sought the same goal that had taken the lives of so many before him. But as fate would have it, the prince arrived at the thorn-covered castle on the day that the princess was to awaken. When he approached the thorn hedge, the thorns turned to flowers, and they magically parted way as the prince approached, before closing again behind him. He searched the castle, finding the king and queen, all the servants and animals still fast asleep, having not aged since that fateful day. But no sign as of yet of the cursed princess. At long last, he found the old tower, and he made his way up the winding stairs and to the secluded room. And there he found Briar Rose, the sleeping beauty. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away. And he stooped down, and he gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke, and she looked at him quite sweetly. They then went down together, and the king and the queen and the whole court awoke, and looked at each other in great astonishment. The horses and the dogs outside shook themselves, the pigeons flapped their wings, even the fire roared itself awake after 100 years of sleep. And at last the great thorn hedge receded back into the earth. The spell of the sleeping beauty was broken at last. And then the marriage of Briar Rose and her prince was celebrated with great splendor, and they lived contented to the end of their days.